Picture this, a packed funeral home, lilies everywhere, and my cousin Mark standing at the podium wiping fake tears while telling everyone how much he loved his Aunt Rose. 10 minutes later, Aunt Rose, very much alive, walks through the door in a red dress, smiling like she's here for Sunday brunch. Mark dropped the urn. Because Aunt Rose wasn't dead. She'd just spent 7 years planning the most expensive I'm back in history. If you've ever had family try to bury you before your time, hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like. This is the coldest, richest, most perfectly executed family revenge you'll hear all year. Buckle up. My name is Jasmine. I'm 32, and Aunt Rose is my mom's older sister, the one who never married, never had kids, and supposedly wasted her life running a little bookkeeping business out of her house. Except Aunt Rose didn't waste anything. She started that bookkeeping business in 1978 with one calculator and a folding card table. By the early 90s she had half the restaurants in Atlanta on her client list. By 2005 she'd quietly invested every extra dollar into Apple, Amazon, and Tesla before anybody outside California had even heard of them. She lived in the same modest 3-bedroom brick house, drove a 1998 Camry, and wore the same 9 outfits on rotation so nobody would ever guess she was sitting on 8 figures. The family called her cheap. Behind her back they called her miserly old maid. But to me? She was magic. She paid for my braces, my private school, my first car, always in cash, always with a wink and a "don't tell the vultures." Then, in 2016, the diagnosis came, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live. That's when the vultures circled. In March 2017, Aunt Rose died. The hospice nurse found her cold in her bed one morning. Closed casket funeral. Mark and Tiffany sobbing like Oscar winners. I was numb. 3 days after the funeral, they put the house on the market. That's when the first miracle happened. The coroner called. There'd been a mix-up at the hospital. The body in Aunt Rose's bed wasn't Aunt Rose. It was another patient with the same last name who'd been released to the wrong hospice company. The paperwork got swapped. Aunt Rose had actually been transferred to a clinical trial in Houston the week before, alive. She'd been too drugged to realize what was happening when they wheeled her out. By the time she woke up in Texas, her family had already declared her dead and started spending her money. What nobody outside a handful of oncologists has ever heard of is Protocol RX-71, a Phase 1/2 trial out of MD Anderson in Houston that, in 2017, was so experimental they weren't even calling it a cancer trial publicly. They were calling it targeted mitochondrial rescue with autologous stem cell reprogramming. Translation: they were trying to teach your cells not to die when cancer told them to. The catch? Only 30 patients in the entire world were accepted. You had to be stage 4 pancreatic, under 70, no major comorbidities, and, most importantly, willing to sign a stack of NDAs thicker than the Bible because the funding was coming from a consortium of billionaire donors who didn't want the method leaked until patents were locked. Aunt Rose's oncologist in Atlanta had secretly nominated her months earlier. She was the perfect candidate, otherwise healthy, sharp as a tack, and rich enough to self-fund the $1.2 million upfront cost if insurance balked, which they did. The day the acceptance letter came, she was already so sick she could barely hold a pen. Mark and Tiffany saw the envelope, assumed it was another medical bill, and tossed it on the pile. Aunt Rose found it 2 days later, read it through morphine fog, and made one phone call. 48 hours after that, a private medical jet landed at a tiny executive airport outside Atlanta. 2 doctors and a nurse in plain clothes showed up at the house with an ambulance that had no markings. They told the family they were transferring her to Emory for comfort care. Mark actually helped load the gurney because he wanted her hospital bed for his new gaming setup. They sedated her for the flight. When she woke up, she was in a sealed ward that looked more like a luxury bunker than a hospital, frosted glass walls, HEPA-filtered air that smelled faintly of eucalyptus, and a view of nothing but sky. No phones, no internet, no visitors for the first 90 days. The trial rules were brutal: total isolation to prevent any immune contamination. For the first 6 weeks she was intubated half the time. They harvested her bone marrow, rewrote her stem cells with a custom CRISPR sequence, then rain-fused them while blasting her pancreas with a targeted proton beam that hadn't even been FDA approved yet. Her hair fell out in clumps. She dropped to 89 pounds. The doctors told her later there were 3 nights they almost called it and sent her to palliative. She'd been off the grid, literally presumed dead. And for 7 years, she stayed gone. She crushed the cancer. The trial worked. She got stronger, richer, those investments kept climbing, and angrier. She hired the meanest estate lawyer in the South. She moved into a condo under an alias. She watched from afar as Mark and Tiffany turned her little brick house into a McMansion flip. As they blew through the brokerage accounts they thought were password protected, she'd left dummy accounts with a few $100,000 for them to find. She waited until every penny they stole was spent, every lie was told, every friend and neighbor believed they were the poor grieving heirs. Then, last month, she made her move. Step 1, she walked into the title company with the original deed, death certificate reversal, and a court order declaring the death null and void. The house was hers again, legally, instantly. Step 2, she filed criminal charges. Forgery. Elder abuse. Identity theft. The prosecutor called it the cleanest case I've seen in 20 years. Step 3, the reading of the real will. Mark and Tiffany thought they were coming to the lawyer's office to finalize probate. They showed up in designer clothes they'd bought with Aunt Rose's money, smirking, ready to collect the last few accounts. Instead, they walked into a conference room and there was Aunt Rose, alive, radiant in that red dress, legs crossed, sipping sweet tea like she'd never left. The lawyer slid the will across the table. Everything, house, investments, now worth $38 million, the condo, the safety deposit boxes full of gold coins they never found, left to me, to the local children's hospital, and to the church Aunt Rose tithed to for 40 years. Mark and Tiffany got exactly $1 each. Legal requirement. Mark started screaming. Tiffany burst into tears, real ones this time. Aunt Rose just smiled, sweet as peach cobbler, and said, "Y'all threw me such a lovely funeral. Shame I couldn't make it. But I did bring a little something for the road." She opened her purse, pulled out 2 plane tickets, and slid them across the table. One way to Paraguay. Because that's the only country in South America with no extradition treaty. She'd already frozen every account they had. The McMansion was in foreclosure. The Lexus was repossessed that morning. Mark tried to lunge at her. The bailiff sitting quietly in the corner stood up. Turns out Aunt Rose had expected that. As they were escorted out in handcuffs, yes, actual handcuffs, Aunt Rose finally looked at me and winked. "I told you not to make a scene 7 years ago, baby. I didn't say I wouldn't." Last week Aunt Rose moved back into her little brick house. Same furniture. Same coffee pot. She hung a new plaque by the front door that reads, "I lived, bitch." Mark and Tiffany are facing 20 years each. Uncle Richard had a stroke when the FBI showed up at his door. And me? I'm learning how to manage a $38 million trust fund from the woman who taught me never to let the vultures see you bleed. Sometimes death isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the 7-year setup for the greatest comeback you'll ever witness. Aunt Rose always said money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy time and lawyers. Never let anyone rush you to your grave. Some of us come back richer, wiser, and wearing the perfect shade of revenge red. That's the story of the aunt who got buried alive and still won. If this gave you chills and a standing ovation, smash like, subscribe, turn on notifications. In the comments tell me, what would you have done if your family tried to bury you for your money? I read every single one.